Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome to everybody. You guys okay?
Sure.
I know people are still coming in the door there, but my name is Mark Little. I have the absolute honor and privilege in the most remarkable space I have been to in many years at this festival. Myself and Johnny were trying to work at the history. 1717, this was built in.
Wow.
And we're here to talk with, I think, three of the most remarkable media innovators that I've talked to on a stage in Perugia about what I think is a revolutionary moment for journalism that I can think of. I get excited when I think about it, which is, maybe to frame it, when I was growing up, to be a journalist, you had to work for an organization. You had to work for an organization, and your value to the community was decided by whatever title or byline that organization would give you. And you never had a connection with the audience. You never had to talk to them. They never talked back to you. And today, if you're coming out of journalism school right now, you can have a direct connection with the community. The value of your connection is on the basis of the value you give to that community, and they can talk back to you and collaborate with you. That is the conversation we're going to have today, which is about the idea of journalism embracing what we call content creation. I have painted a very pretty picture here, but it is full of potential obstacles, challenges, dangers. And to introduce to you the people we're going to talk about that with, first of all, we are going to be joined, I think, furthest from me geographically by Taylor Lorenz. I'm not sure, Taylor, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Taylor, thank you for joining us, and thank you from the personal level. You have been my guide to online culture since I was interested in innovation in this field. Obviously, I know you from your work, and we know you from your work with the New York Times, with the Washington Post, but now, obviously, and again with your book, Extremely Online, which I would highly recommend, and now you have User Mag, which is your Substack newsletter, and of course, Power User, which is one of my favorite podcasts right now. So thank you for joining us from Washington, D.C.
I'm in LA.
LA, even better.
Even earlier.
I wish you could see the 1717 theater we're in, so welcome from LA. Jane Ferguson is someone that I've come to respect, a friend and supporter of the work that she's been doing. First of all, Jane is an award-winning foreign correspondent, is someone that has been defined, I think, in her work in the field by being the person that doesn't leave when everyone else goes. She sticks around. She has worked for CNN, Al Jazeera, was foreign correspondent for PBS NewsHour, and more recently, she has been working in her work in Princeton, incubating a startup that is now live and fully operational called Noosphere, which is a platform to help journalists on the ground in the places that need to be covered to find their audience. Johnny Harris, again, you've been one of those people that I've been watching since the work you began with at Vox. I must say, I saw somewhere that you said you wanted to, first of all, be a diplomat, then you thought you might be a cinematographer, and then you became a journalist. So you became well known to audiences with Vox, with the series Borders, but now you have 6.5 million subscribers, I think at last count, for work that has essentially taken the most complex issues in the world and breaking it down in a way that makes sense. And I'd highly recommend you check that out. Also, your 7 Things You Learned as a Journalist is one of the best pieces I've read about the creator and journalist economy. So that's my introduction, how I'd frame the conversation. Looking forward to your questions as well a bit later. What I'd like to do, maybe Taylor, start with you, someone who's made this transition from the traditional media to being a creator. Many people, when they come to me about ideas for journalism, they say, I want to save journalism. That's my mission. But actually, what's your mission? And what is the audience that you're serving? What do they need from you, in your view?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, I cover online culture, so I cover the way that the internet is shaping culture, business, and politics. And so my goal is to really just reach people where they're at and try to essentially explain the online world in a way that's easy for them to access. I feel like when I wrote for a lot of these legacy publications, my stuff was behind paywalls. It was framed in a way that appealed more towards maybe an older audience or an audience that was less online. And I like to sort of speak to people on the platforms that they're using so that they can sort of contextualize what they're seeing every day.
And how has that two-way communication changed your understanding of the value of the work that you do, now that you're talking directly to that community?
Yeah, well, I've always had a super interactive relationship with my audience because I started independently. I started as a blogger, if you guys can remember the blogging days, like 15 years ago. So I would always kind of engage very heavily in comments and be very open about the things that I'm covering. I cover tech from the user side. So instead of writing about, say, like TikTok Corporation, I write a lot about how people are using these technologies. And I need to speak to users a lot. So I'm very open about my editorial process. I say, here's what I'm covering. Here's what I'm thinking of covering. What are you guys seeing? What are you guys doing? And I try to sort of build stories like in public with my audience so that they can, one, make sure that I get the story right and also just feel kind of, invested in it.
Jay, turn to you now, in terms of what you feel your mission is now in life and for whom you are solving a problem. Tell me about Noosphere.
Well, I've always been pretty mission-driven, and the problems that we're solving for are pretty massive. I mean, what we've really built at Noosphere is essentially it's a new platform, and what that means is that it's a two-sided marketplace, and that's just business jargon for the fact that we're going to be a meeting place for journalists and their audiences. My mission right now is to produce and have used by as many top reporters in the field some of the best tech for them to reach an audience and interact with that audience. Basically to reinvent the distribution model of field reporting across the world, because it obviously is ripe for disruption, but it's also ripe for redesign. And for the audience, I want to bring a much better sense of authentic, close contact with the best field reporters in the world. And for the reporters, I want to cut out the middleman financially. I mourn the death of many legacy media organizations. I've been privileged to work with extraordinary ones, but the business model is not working, certainly in broadcasting. And not only can we fix that, but we can actually make journalism a lucrative career once again.
Johnny, if I was starting as a creator today, my temptation would be just to grab attention, grab headlines. But you choose subjects that are, some of them are really hard, even for the most seasoned geopolitical correspondent. So what is your mission? What are you doing by choosing topics that in some ways defy that kind of easy hit?
For me, it's always been the same impulse, which is to help people feel a deep understanding of something. Because I want a deep understanding of something. It's a very authentic act for me to ask a question and then not stop until I deeply understand it. And luckily we have these magical visual tools that I use in that methodology of seeking understanding. Like for me, it's a very authentic personal experience. And the fact that there is an audience who will resonate with that very personal act is awesome. And it's actually the beauty of this whole democratized way of publishing journalism. I don't think I would have ever made it as a journalist in the old way, because I wouldn't have been able to fit within the norms of traditional journalism. I got my start at Vox because Vox was new media. It's funny, we kind of lump all non-creator-led media into this old thing, but back then Vox was like the new media and there was a lot of flexibility. They allowed me to do that very personal thing of going about journalism in my own way and publishing it in an authentic way and then having a conversation with the audience. And I'm really grateful for that because that's exactly what I'm doing today. And what we're trying to build now is an organization that doesn't just do that for me, but builds that same support system around other creators so they can do that same thing for their point of view and their way of understanding the world. And we believe that that's a sacred thing, a creator-led journalistic endeavor.
It looks like you're an overnight success, but there's hard work for yourself. Your wife and business partner is in the audience today with us. Would it be not just easier to serve your time in the mainstream traditional media and get that anchor chair at some point in the future?
Not if there's not an audience for it. Unfortunately, we're headed into a time where that anchor chair won't work as a business model. I don't know if we're 5 years away or 15 years away, but we are headed in that direction. It seems like we're headed pretty quickly. And then I also think we're headed in a time where where younger people, at least journalists that I talk to, they don't want that. That's not an exciting prospect to be in that position that for a long time was the sort of like the top of the pyramid. So I think we're moving into a time where people want a sense of connection, authenticity, a smaller scale, personal connection with their information. There's a lot of pitfalls and like kind of alarming aspects of that trend. There's also a lot of cool creative opportunities for ways that journalism can be done differently, and that's what I'm excited about.
Jane, I was reading your book, No Ordinary Assignment, amazing book, and living the life that I think any young correspondent wants to live. I remember when I left traditional journalism to launch a new startup, my friends had organized an intervention to stop me because they thought it was a lunatic act. Why did you take what does seem to many an act of lunacy at the height of your career?
It is interesting. When I was a kiddo, I would have thought, I had this image in my mind of being this foreign correspondent, and then you would go on and become an anchor. And I achieved incredible conventional success in my career, but I did also reach a point where I was just collecting trophies. Interestingly, I also could barely afford to buy the trophies that I was winning. Most people don't realize you have to buy your own Emmys. The DuPont's very expensive. And so I still have a Peabody I never bought that my husband gives me a hard time that I didn't buy it. But, the economics just weren't there. It doesn't make any sense anymore. And I was in Kabul when it fell to the Taliban and in August 2021, and we ended up by stint of a coincidence, the networks and broadsheets pulled their people out after covering the fall of Kabul. They pulled them out very quickly, very nervous about security. And I was very lucky PBS let myself and my cameraman make our own decisions security-wise, and so we decided to stay. And what happened was American mainstream media missed the biggest airlift of human beings since Saigon 75, and the biggest US foreign policy story in decades. And we were there at the airport, as chance would have it, covering the whole thing. And I was I was going live every night on national news on Skype, but I was also then putting up videos on Instagram and Twitter, and they were exploding. And the networks were kind of ripping them off. They were like starting to air them. And that's where, for a flash of a moment, I realized that the disintermediation was the future. Like you said when you opened this talk, my whole career, I always needed a network or a newspaper to be allowed to be a foreign correspondent. And those gatekeepers had been people I'd had to please and try to impress for 15 years. And suddenly that was changing. And I think that's where I saw a really bright future.
Taylor, you've been covering, as we call them, influencers, creators, lots of different words to describe people who are democratic media. Making that change from being someone who covered the culture to being part of the culture, did it require a massive mindset shift for you? I mean, you were obviously more than most attuned to the needs of that area, but did you find yourself in a different mindset the day after you decided, that's it, I'm all in?
Actually, it was a little bit anticlimactic because I feel like it wasn't as a huge shift. I already worked remotely, and it just felt like instead of filing into a CMS and getting an editor feedback on something, I was posting it directly on Substack. So I would say, yeah, I definitely missed the editing. That was the biggest thing that I've had to get used to. But as I mentioned, I started as a blogger, and I've actually worked in social media longer than I've been a writer. Most of my career, I've been a social media editor and working in audience development. I had a Snapchat show, and so I've been working a lot in like new media formats for media brands. So it kind of felt like a nice return. I definitely never really aspired to work in legacy media, and I learned so much, and I'm really glad that I had that opportunity to work at the places that I did. But I don't know that it was always the most natural fit. So it was kind of nice to feel like, oh, okay, I can breathe again, and I can kind of do whatever I want, which I think is every journalist's dream, to just do whatever they want. I do miss having an editor, though.
Okay. Well, given the proven success that three of you have had, why do you think so many really qualified journalists who should be independent can't make that leap, can't make the jump to do what you're doing?
I think there's a lot of work to do in an independent context that journalists aren't necessarily, that's not their core competency. They're journalists, they're photographers, they're filmmakers, whatever it is. And they don't necessarily want to run an organization, hire people, pay taxes, do brand deals. There is a lot of work that goes into it. And you, especially at the beginning, have to be on kind of a treadmill for a lot of years. You have to publish a lot of stuff to win those views. And at the end of the day, you have to play the game of the attention economy. And a lot of us hate that because we want to do the Lord's work. We want to do journalism. We are out there making people stand accountable. And I think there is a need to embrace some of that unknown and that complexity if you are going to go independent. I also think that within the industry, we have to give an on-ramp to some of that talent. We can't expect all of the best journalists to also want to be business owners and entrepreneurs with a high risk tolerance and the ability to have a loss leader for 2 years before they start making money. Like, there has to be some kind of on-ramp. And I don't totally know what that is. I know that Jane is building a version of that. We're trying to build a version of it. It's probably going to be a lot of different on-ramps. But I don't think the model, especially my model of jumping ship, I was lucky to have a partner, life partner and business partner who did a lot of that work for me. A lot of the organization building, we did that together, but she really let out so I could do the journalism. We can't expect everyone to have that same story. And so I'm hoping that there will be not the same model as the old guard, but some institutional buffer that gives journalists an on-ramp to still do the independent thing, still get in on the economics and the upside, but not have to tango with so much sort of business fundamentals and complexity.
There is another thing I remember from first time I used Twitter as a TV anchor and going on Twitter and seeing people say Mark Little is shit. And then realizing when you talk back and say, well, why am I shit? And you had this conversation where suddenly you actually had real informed value coming back. You became a better journalist. But Jane, a lot of people who are like the big feet have the hardest time. They may get these sort of six-figure deals with Substack or with some other platform, but coming to terms with having an audience that answers you back is a really difficult one.
That's only one of a number of things that are especially hard for the biggest names. An audience that answers you back, that's something we've been actually working. One of the nice things, one of the most exciting things about building a platform is that you get to sort of design that. So we are designing a way to interact with your audience without recreating the kind of comment section, which is just a bar brawl of, loud people. But I think that dealing with your audience face-to-face is something that even the big stars are fairly well versed at now because of social media. But like to your point, Johnny, you come from maybe you have your own show. You had a huge team. The more successful you are, ironically, the more specialist your skill is, and what you need in this economy and this world is an incredible array of skills. And so the reality is, and we see that at Noosphere as well, where we specifically look for a very specific type of reporter, is that it's not for everybody. Not everybody's going to want to leave legacy media and become an independent creator. And so it's really for those who have the stomach for not only reskilling on all of these skills, but also perhaps going from the very, very top of your game to starting something new, which kind of feels like starting from scratch, which is hard to take, whenever you've spent years and years building a very prestigious mainstream media career. And so it's really going to be the next generation who come up, and then those who make the transition. It's not going to be everybody, but those who will, what the payoff is after those years, like you say, of being on the road, building that audience, is that no one can take it away from you. No one can fire you from your job anymore. So I think that there's this incredible long tail to your career that you never had before.
Taylor, one of the things that defines you, I think you've been willing to engage with anybody who perks your interest and you want to have a conversation with. What do you think defines a successful mindset for a journalist moving into this creator economy? And what are the common characteristics of the person who just doesn't work out?
Yeah, I think Johnny made a good point before, which is that a lot of the skills needed to succeed in traditional journalism are not necessarily the ones that you need to succeed independently. So I think having an entrepreneurial mindset really important. I feel like I've learned a lot about business stuff. I definitely was not prepared for the amount of time that I spend doing just like business related things. So I think that's hard. I think also a lot of journalists like to go really deep and sort of shut the world out and like go, investigate something for a while. And I think Johnny made a really good point too earlier, where it's a treadmill. And I've talked to a lot of other journalists, places, people that worked for places where I used to work, and I don't think that they're prepared for the publishing schedule that you need to maintain initially to get started, because you have to publish so frequently, and I think a lot of people are used to having a little bit more time when they're in these organizations.
I think that's a major maybe weakness or blind spot within this new economy. In the old days, you had the newspaper, which had a front line that was grabby. You had like maybe the crossword in the back that people subscribed for. And that's what people subscribed for mostly. And then you had like the investigation, spotlight section that was like a few people read, but it was the important sort of accountability, hardcore, it took 9 months for this story journalism. And I don't actually have a theory as to what takes that place, other than like ProPublica or something. But like in this economy, how do you subsidize that reporting that's so useful? The answer to us is my channel has gotten big enough now. There's like 20 people working on the channel in one way or another, maybe 17, and that allows us to kind of do shorter formats that still pay the bills, and then spend, like we're doing this piece on ocean mining right now, like deep sea mining. We've been working on it for 7 months. I could never do that in my first 3 or 4 years. But now that we have a team and an editorial calendar, we can chip away at something like that, and it's sort of a loss leader. So that's sort of my hope, is that as these independent creators turn into bigger sort of entities, relatively small, but bigger for them, they're able to do those investigative pieces, because I think that is a part of journalism that is so vital, and that this new fractionalized model doesn't totally account for.
I do think that the fractionalized model, however, doesn't have to be the future. I mean, I think ultimately the biggest flaw right now in the content creator space for journalism is just how siloed we all are. I mean, ultimately, we can have independent incomes and independent followers and communities built around us, but also bundle with other reporters, which means that you're still giving your consumer the customer much better value for money than I have to subscribe for this Substack, I have to subscribe for this one and this one. And essentially, that creates an incredible amount of churn. People are only ever going to subscribe for so many. Building a business model, and something that we've been obsessive about at Noosphere, is bundling together so that, if you are silent for a while you head off, and you communicate this with your followers and your fans, and you keep them updated, in the background with podcasts and videos and photos while you're doing this deeper dive work, field work that takes time, they still have access to the entire platform and its content.
But it was an old cliche, which was the Baghdad Bureau never made money from the newspaper. They got it from the sales at the back and the, whatever, Christmas Story. But now you're both kind of proving that if the journalist takes the economic consideration seriously, you can fund the most serious, the most impactful journalism. But there are different models, right? So Johnny, obviously you're relying primarily on advertising, if I'm right here, which takes big volume. Is that do you feel vulnerable to that sort of whim of the platform to send you the algorithm the right way?
Not as vulnerable as I used to feel. We're at a point now where the creator economy is now becoming a mature thing. There are brands now that spend money in this space. There's more and more audience in this space. To me, it feels like the migration from ad dollars going into old formats into these new formats is pretty secure. Where I feel vulnerable is the incentives of a volume business, especially on an attention economy platform, i.e. YouTube, means that I am subtly incentivized to always choose what's going to do bigger numbers. And I want to build an outlet as we bring on more creators that has that as an incentive. We always want to try to reach a lot of people. and have that incentive, but we also want to nourish our community. And if that's a smaller community, a subscriber-funded model that mixes in, to me, that feels like I will be less vulnerable to those incentives, less vulnerable to the market, and more inclined to look at the smaller group of people who are paying subscribers and say, what do we need to do to make sure we're nourishing you? You might have an interest for a deeper dive conversation or something, and then that will incentivize us to do those deeper dives. So we're hoping that a mix of subscriber and ad is the future, but I don't totally know. We're sort of in uncharted waters here.
Taylor, one of the things I think has been so impressive has been a platform like Substack is so diverse in the kind of creator it attracts. I mean, you have those ex-media anchor people who get shitloads of money and whatever, but you've also got these really authentically weird and beautiful niches where people are finding community. I might be too simplistic in talking about that, because I can hear you when you say it takes a lot of work every day to maintain that loyalty. But how is this new intentional model that competes with the attention economy being for you and for others, people like you?
Well, I have a little bit of bad news, which is it's still very much the attention economy. Yes, it's based on subscription revenue, but you need to post and post and post. Like, I was just talking to another journalist that went independent the other day who feels like he has to post 4 or 5 times a week or he starts to see churn. And I think people's expectations, because of every other social platform sort of bombarding them with content, they really feel like they're not getting their values worth unless you're writing a lot. I have been very nervous to overly affiliate with Substack or be seen as a Substacker, sort of as my main thing, even though it definitely is how I primarily monetize right now, because I'm still getting started. But so I'm trying to kind of hedge it with growing my YouTube, monetizing my podcast, and sort of juggling all these other platforms. But
if the attention economy is still dominant, there is a sort of a sense, I think, from mainstream media that there's kind of audience capture sometimes where you have to pander to the prejudice and bias of your community, that before long you're taking more extreme positions because they're the things that engage. And obviously people see that when they look at possibly a more conservative right-wing creator economy. Is that pressure, do you think, dominant for a lot of creators, or is that something that's overblown by the traditional media?
Oh, Taylor, I can see you starting to talk. I've got a thought on this too. You go first.
I feel the pressure so much. That has been one of the hardest things to deal with. I get the situation where I'm covered very heavily in the right-wing media, unfortunately, or fortunately, because I do get more attention that way, I guess. But I have a lot of people that end up subscribing because they think that I'm just going to say a bunch of nice things about the Democrats. And I'm very, very critical of them as well. And that makes people very angry. And that's actually been one of my biggest challenges, is people's perception of what they think my content will be. And if you criticize the Democrats, they get incredibly mad. And so that's hard. It's hard to see, it's hard to get scoops, to chase really big stories, to spend so much time breaking a news story that affects a major tech company or affects something, and then have people unsubscribing and yelling at you because it critiques, Kamala Harris or Joe Biden or whatever.
My take on this is different because I have a different beat, but I've actually been very heartened by, after maybe 5 years of building this channel, there is an audience that wants a nuance. I publish 30, 40-minute explainer documentaries about really obscure or complicated things, and I've done that week after week for years. There is an audience of people, they're not as loud, but they're there, and they want to be nourished with information and context and history, and they'll sit through some complicated stuff if it's presented beautifully and if it's done in a way that is engaging. I play the engagement game, I do, but I do it and I fold in the vegetables at the same time, and there are people who want that and who appreciate that. And so I think you're right that there are niches who want everything. The loudest niches happen to be the ones with strong political opinions. But there's also a niche of people who just want rigorous journalism. And I'm really hopeful about that.
Jane, because you navigate, issues that in Europe might be seen one way, Gaza, for example. In the United States, I've just come back from a trip there. Wow, it's seen a very different way to most Europeans' view of it. You're navigating this guardrail here, this live rail beside you. I mean, how do you navigate that idea that what you're trying to say is authenticity from people on the ground, let the opinion be to other people? But I'm sure people are not happy with that kind of answer.
Sure. I mean, it's very tempting to go for, especially whenever you're just getting started, to go for a quick hit of bombastic opinion, which will get you a certain degree of subscribers, a certain number of subscribers very, very fast. But again, for us, we looked at this as a platform and not a publisher. And we were very, very clear from the start that what we wanted to serve was answer the question many people were asking as legacy media really starts to decline rapidly, which was, where did all the journalists go? And for us, that's what we wanted to answer. And we wanted to say they went here, and a way to do that is to focus almost relentlessly on actual field reporting. So we've launched with no opinion. And that's one of our very, very few rules. We're a closed platform, so it's invite only for the reporters. Now, we will have opinion at some stage in the future, very clearly marked, but we took a business perspective on this as well. There's so much free opinion out there. I mean, if you want to hear someone in their basement talking loudly about every thought that passed between their ears, that's for free. You know, we were looking at what is valuable, what do people need right now, strong analysis, smart analysis, but I'm not, you know, I think people who, you know, make some money very quickly on independent channels by with just an incredible amount of opinion only, that growth tapers off and hits a ceiling very fast. And they're going to see more and more competition as people come from mainstream media into that space and keep doing exactly the same thing. So there's just going to be, I think, an incredible overload of opinionators giving their content away for free.
Taylor, if I can ask you just about the reporting you've done on the attitudes of like a rising generation, Gen Z, even millennials, to news. I get the sense that a lot of people of that generation don't think about news the way the older people do, right? It's a cloud of content that comes at them. They use different ways of navigating creators they trust and have a relationship with. Just give me a sense of what the dominant methods of building trust for a younger news consumer are at the moment within this creator economy.
Yeah, when I worked in traditional media, I used to joke that I would just write the same story over and over again, which is like, people are getting news from, you know, insert platform here, Instagram, TikTok, whatever. I think in terms of trust, it's really important to be transparent when you mess up and to have that back and forth with your audience. I think especially if you're on a more visual platform like YouTube or even TikTok, with something where people are bonding with you, they feel like you're accountable to them, right? And so I think you have to be transparent with your reporting process. And I think the more transparent you can be about like what you got right or maybe what you got wrong is really helpful. And I feel like I've seen Johnny do this before in his videos, actually. Where he's like, oh, and I learned this, or whatever. It just, I think you have to have a willingness to be humble and hear feedback. And explain to things too, when maybe somebody is misunderstanding something you put out, sort of take time to clarify.
Wow, because like humility does not come easy to journalism, right? Anything you guys here with me I was going to say in studio, in the theater, have anything to say, share about attitudes and trust? How do you build it?
I think, what Taylor said is sort of my line too. Like, I am a person, like I said, it's a very personal act. YouTube is a personal platform where people share what they feel about the world. And again, there's a lot of opinion. My curiosity and commitment to facts and truth is an authentic part of me, and I share that out loud in this format. And so I do get things wrong sometimes. And it's a cardinal sin, it's a big deal, like it would be at an outlet, but it's not the same. Because I then go to my audience and I say, hey, I got this wrong, and here's why, here's my misstep, and I see that now. Thank you to all of the good faith commenters who helped me see it. And that is actually, I always joke, like when that happens, it's actually a huge step forward of trust for the audience, as opposed to what you would think it would be. You would think it would be like, oh, he got something wrong. But in a world where people are used to big, impervious media institutions that are faceless and that are funded by corporations, kind of just being omniscient and talking down truth, it's a refreshing thing for a lot of audiences who want to feel like, oh, I actually see this person processing through something. And my videos are really long, and they could be way shorter. They could probably be half the length, and I could get across the same factual information. A lot of my storytelling is me processing through the information and showing that out loud. And I do that very intentionally. And I do that to make sure that I'm imbuing a sense of look at how I got to where I got. I think the process is as imbuing of trust as the results of the actual assertions.
It's fascinating because, I mean, objectivity was the way we did that before, right? We'd always guaranteed two sides. I remember being in a studio with a stopwatch. Someone was asking me to stop after 30 seconds because the other side had to get some, and we called that objectivity. Yeah. This is a very different definition of objectivity, Jane. I mean, does it feel a little bit uncomfortable for you to think about showing how the sausage is made?
No, I think it's time. I think it's an upgrade to lean more into authenticity. And that doesn't mean here's my opinion and here I am manipulating facts. I think the authenticity is something that, we know from all of the research that that's what news consumers want, and especially young news consumers. But it has to be very real authenticity. It can't just be here I am in my studio trying to be, appealing to TikTokers. I think what matters most and what we've really focused on is reporters who are there. Authenticity involves these days also having, a reporter who actually lives in Damascus, or who is, from Yemen, or is an Israeli or a Gazan reporter, and putting them on. And, I remember for years in network news, they cared about your hair, they cared about your accent, they cared about the way you looked, the way you spoke. I mean, it was so absurd. And what we find now is that it's not only not true, but it's absolutely the opposite. People want to see a human being reporting, and they might be very honest about their background, where they come from, why they do this kind of work, and people want that. And I think that the new platforms and the new technology allows them to do that better.
Maybe a quick question before I ask your questions. Taylor, one thing I've noticed recently is that a lot of big news organizations are kind of subtly and not so subtly trying to back into the creator economy, sending out a reporter to do a TikTok, or I think in one case Fox buying the company that kind of manages conservative media. How do you think those big news organizations will fare trying to be all new media, all new creator economy?
Well, when I worked in social, again, for most of my career in news, I feel like I've been part of those efforts. I had my own Snapchat show in 2016 covering the election. I was doing Musical.ly for one news org. I ran the People Magazine Vine account. I think it's just a tough fit because ultimately these are brand handles. I mean, you have people like Dave Jorgensen at the Washington Post and others that have become very personalities unto themselves. I don't know if people are following that for the brand. I think they're bonding with the personalities, and when the personalities leave, people want to follow the personalities. So I think it's hard for brands.
Yeah, this is more sad being asked by a traditional news organization, haven't worked with them to make us go viral. It's like trying to throw yourself a surprise birthday party or something. But anyway, listen, I know we have questions, multitudes, I'm sure, in the audience. We have a first person up here on the third row. Microphone is coming to you. Great. So maybe, yep.
Hi. So I have a question, especially for Johnny Harris. Johnny, if we were friends. I would like to ask you about your team. In some of your videos, we see that actually you're not all alone anymore doing what you do. And I think that sometimes the illusion can be that, the content creators are all alone, whereas you just told that you are 17 or something like that. And so, yeah, basically...
It's absolutely right. I started making stuff and doing all of the things on my own. And I did that for a lot of years. But on my own, there was always a team. There was always people helping. At Vox, there were social media people or community people. After about a year or two doing it on my own channel, my wife stopped doing YouTube herself. She kind of got tired of that world. But she had built an organization and a team and brought that over. And that started with a project manager type person to really codify all the process of how we make a video or how I made a video and start to codify it. And then an editor and an animator. And it took me years to let my hands off the tools for editing and animation. So it's a lot of editors and animators now. We have really ambitious visuals and have an amazing team of editors and animators that we've worked together for years. And then as the organization's grown, it's also turned into a senior production manager who oversees all of the different things for the different channels. But most of the people on our team are technicians. They're people bringing the visuals to life because visuals are such a huge part of it. And then we have 2 pre-production people who are doing reporting. And then we work with a variety of freelancers, sometimes local freelancers, sometimes other reporters who focus on a certain topic. Yeah, so that's the team. And then as we grow into these other revenue sources, we're going to need to build out more of an executive team. So we're actually in the process of looking for our first sort of executive role to join me and is to like chart the business forward. But up until now, it's basically been a production company. Yeah, I guess like I kept, the other day I was talking to somebody, I was like, yeah, and we're probably going to have a subscription platform soon, and da-da-da. And he's like, you keep talking about your business, you're describing a media company. And I'm like, oh, I guess we've created a media company. But to me, it was just making, like, I just love making YouTube videos. But it's become kind of accidentally a media company. And we're leaning into that because we found ourselves, when I left Vox, I didn't know that this industry trend was going to occur the way it did. I just wanted to go make stuff in an independent environment. But yeah, now it's a media company.
And I love questions at the front. We've someone, there you go.
Yeah, hello. My name is Guy. I'm from Genomics. First of all, thank you very much for really useful and valuable conversation. I have a question. So we're talking a lot about the going independent, leaving the legacy media. I don't have the specific data, but like if we're going to take other industry like Silicon Valley, 86% of the startups are dying within the first 5 years. I think in content making, I think the numbers might be higher, lower, but I think it's also high, especially, let's say like for the ones beginners who don't have big name or personal brand. What would be your one advice from each of you, from all 3 speakers, if I may ask, that they should consider to avoid most of the mistakes that, let's say, those big part of majority of failed projects are doing?
Fantastic.
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Fantastic question. I'm going to throw it to LA. Taylor, maybe you want to take that one. This is what the first piece of advice you have to avoid failure.
Gosh, have a savings. It takes a lot of time to build a business and to make money and to sort of grow enough. I think it's really hard to monetize on these social platforms, and there's just so many costs that you don't expect, especially if you're in America. Healthcare costs. One of my biggest expenses is actually legal. You know, I've been sued for defamation many times now throughout my career. So when I went to get legal insurance, it's insanely expensive. So, you know, there's just like lots of expenses that you don't realize that you have to cover.
Jen, you have the benefit of studying entrepreneurship, teaching entrepreneurship. So, but you know, do you still have advice to people out there not to fail?
Well, I would say 2 things most important come to mind. The first one, from a business standpoint, figure out what platform you want to be on and literally just figure out how much you need to make. And then just do the math backwards on, do I want to do subscribers or ad revenue? Literally find out how much you need to make and how many subscribers or viewers you'll need to get there. So you have a chart, a path to chart. The second thing I would say is the same advice I've been giving young freelance reporters for 15 years, which is don't go to where everybody else is doing the news. You know, don't go to Baghdad in 2005. You know, don't go to Afghanistan in 2021, you know, although not enough people were covering that story, but, you know, like stories that attract everybody. You know, find your own niche, find something that you can excel at that is not a crowded field, and you'll find that, that you'll draw that really loyal fan base much faster.
My advice is similar to both. The reason why 90% of startups fail is because they are trying to reinvent or start something totally new We don't have to do that. There is a demand for good information. There always has been. It's just the format in which it's delivered and the place it's delivered and who delivers it is changing. But that demand is still there. We are fulfilling a vacuum that is being created because of a market shift. And so find, as Jane said, the niche that lights you up, that you love, that you feel like you could do for decades, or the format or the approach, and lean into that, because there's probably an audience somewhere for it. And we live in a time where there are discovery algorithms like on YouTube that will match make you with that audience if you work hard to create something that people want. So we are reinventing parts of this, but we are not reinventing the demand for knowledge and information and rigorous reporting. That is an eternal human thing.
Could I just one thing? I've formed a business in the age of venture capital when every media company needed to think big. That's why they failed. Venture capital companies only need 1 out of 10 to work. They don't care about the other 9. So think about Kevin Kelly's old line, find your 1,000 true fans and begin there. I think that's absolutely the case. I'm sorry, we have 5 more minutes, so I might take a couple of questions. Who's nearest the microphone? There we go.
So I have one question, because we were talking about authenticity as a new kind of truth instead of objectivity. And I'm very curious what your ideas are about accountability when it comes to authenticity. Because I'm thinking, for example, of the H-Bomber guy expose of plagiarism on YouTube. Like, you can be very authentic or look very authentic, but also be very wrong or mislead your audience. And I'm very curious to your thoughts on that subject.
I'm going to take one more question, just because we're going to take 2 together. Are we somewhere close to a microphone? Anyone else there? Right down in the front, actually. We'll just take this final question, and we'll answer these 2 together, if that's okay.
Thank you so much. My question is pretty practical. Last time I checked, we couldn't access Noosphere from the EU. So when do you think we will have the access? And are you also thinking of recruiting journalists from the EU region? Thank you.
Great. Let's start with that. That's very practical.
Well, yes, we are. We're planning a UK launch early part of this summer. So that should be very soon. Within the next couple of months, we'll be making the announcement. After that, then into the rest of Europe. But we'll make it available in Canada and the UK. We are always interested in journalists who come and seek us out, say they want to work with us. Seb Walker, who is
Give
our
us a wave, Seb.
Head of content and contributors, is the man to see. So by all means, he's your guy.
Authenticity.
Authenticity is not the new truth. It can't be the new truth. And that's actually the biggest pitfall and vulnerability, is that because information is democratized, I love it because I've been able to build an independent news brand and apparently a media company. But for society, this is a giant, scary danger. And there will be people masquerading as truth with authenticity that are not the real truth and are inflaming ideological ideas. And that is a problem, and we're all facing that with society. That is an old problem, especially with social media. What we can do, and what I believe is the answer to this for people in this room, is let's fight fire with fire. Let's go out there and be the voice of authenticity that is also signaling an earnest desire to find truth and to present it in a way that is authentic but also grounded in facts. And luckily, as I said, there are audiences who want that, who can sniff out when it is earnest, when it is real, and when it is true. But it's not going to go away. The genie's out of the bottle, whatever it is, and we need to push back with putting truth onto these platforms, using the language of the internet, which is authenticity.
I'm just going to close up with a question I'm going to ask on behalf of people in the audience who may work for a big news organization but can't ask this question. Like, I'm saying this to all 3 of you guys, of leaving a traditional news organization to go and be a creator. What's the single kind of line or 2 lines of advice you would give to that person who's nervous but they're willing? Maybe Taylor, ask you that quick question.
Oh my gosh, I'll just say it again. Have a savings. before you quit. Just because it takes longer than you think. But I'm happier than I was before, so I highly recommend.
I would say start making the thing you would make now. Like don't wait until you're independent. Start making it. Maybe even try to work out a deal where you can start publishing it. Start to try your hand at what you would be like if you weren't under an editorial voice. Does that light you up? Is that the most exciting thing? You shouldn't make this jump if you're just doing it because this is the trend in the industry, because it will eat you alive. Like you have to have a motivation of, I love this gets me excited. Start doing it now while you still have a secure job. And if you love it, that is the first indicator that like, okay, you can get through those years of slog of making stuff.
I would echo that, but also don't forget that you can do both. My advice to people now is negotiate your contracts. Everyone's taking pay cuts. When you go in, if they want you to take a pay cut, say, that's fine, but I'm going to be podcasting. That's fine, but I'm going to be on this other platform doing this other work. Do both. And that's a terrific way to transition. You don't have to hold your nose and leap completely. Tell them that you want to be doing other monetization platforms that de-risks your career, and really try to have your cake and eat it for now.
Thank you all for your questions. Most importantly, thank you. And I hope we'll see some of you back next year. On your behalf, can I just ask you to give a sustained round of applause to Jane, to Johnny, and from LA, Taylor. Thank you all.